Montana Territory, 1872. The white expanse of winter stretched across the Bitterroot Valley like a death shroud, silent and unforgiving. Ransom Miller pulled his sheepskin coat tighter as he urged his mount forward through knee-deep snow. At 25, he'd already learned the bitter lesson of the frontier: connection was weakness. Out here, a man survived by keeping to himself, relying on no one, and expecting nothing. Attachments only led to grief in a land where nature culled the weak without mercy. "Just you and me, Domino," he muttered to his paint horse, the vapor of his breath crystallizing before him. "The way it ought to be." 3 years since he'd buried his father and brother after the cattle disease that swept through, leaving him alone with the struggling Box M ranch. 3 years of solitude, of fighting alone against bankruptcy, rustlers, and the elements. If the frontier had taught him anything, it was that survival demanded isolation. Love and family were luxuries that only invited heartbreak. The darkening sky promised another storm rolling in from the mountains. Ransom nudged Domino toward home, calculating the miles to the ranch. He'd been checking fence lines along the north pasture when the first flakes began to fall. Now, with the wind picking up and visibility decreasing, he'd have to push hard to make it back before full dark. The faint sound stopped him, barely audible above the wind. Ransom reined Domino to a halt, tilting his head to listen. There it came again, a sound that might have been a cry or simply the wind playing tricks. His first instinct was to ignore it. The storm was building, and whatever it wasn't his concern. The frontier claimed lives every day. But something, curiosity or a stubborn streak of humanity he hadn't quite killed, made him turn Domino toward the sound. Following it led him to a small ravine where a dark shape huddled against the snow. "Hello." He called, hand moving instinctively to the Colt revolver on his hip. The figure didn't respond. Drawing closer, Ransom saw it was a woman, collapsed in the snow, her dark hair spilling around her. She wore deerskin clothing in the Apache style, though finely made, with intricate beadwork now half buried in snow. Blood had frozen along a gash in her leg, and her breathing came shallow and ragged. "Damn it all," Ransom muttered, dismounting carefully. This was exactly the kind of complication he avoided. Indians were trouble, not because he shared the prejudices of many settlers, but because helping them could bring problems from both sides. The cavalry treated Indian sympathizers with suspicion, while the tribes had every reason to distrust white men. But leaving her meant certain death. Even as he considered riding away, Ransom knew he couldn't. Some lines a man didn't cross, not if he wanted to recognize himself in the morning. The woman's eyes fluttered open as he approached, dark, intelligent eyes that fixed on him with neither trust nor fear, just a weary resignation. She was young, perhaps 20, with features that struck him immediately with their beauty despite her obvious pain. "I'm not going to hurt you," Ransom said, knowing she might not understand. "But you'll die out here." Her reply came in English, each word measured with effort. "Then let me die with dignity, white man." Ransom's eyebrows rose. Dignity's in short supply when the wolves come. "Your choice, but I'm offering shelter." Her gaze searched his face, assessing. Finally, she gave a slight nod. "I have little choice." Getting her onto Domino was a struggle. She was light, too light, suggesting she'd gone without food, but her injured leg made mounting difficult. Ransom ended up cradling her before him in the saddle, her body rigid against his chest as they began the journey back to the ranch. "What's your name?" he asked as they rode, trying to keep her conscious. "Varina," she replied after a long pause, as though deciding whether to trust him with even that small piece of herself. "Varina Mantooth." Ransom frowned at the surname, Mantooth. "That's not Apache." "My father was a trader," she said, voice fading as consciousness slipped. "My mother, Chiricahua Apache." Before he could ask more, her head slumped against his chest, her breathing shallow but steady. Ransom urged Domino faster, the snow now falling thick around them, erasing their tracks almost as soon as they were made. The lights of the Box M ranch house were never a more welcome sight than when they finally emerged from the worsening blizzard. The two-story log structure stood sturdy against the white fury of the storm, smoke curling from the stone chimney. Ransom guided Domino to the barn first, where he awkwardly dismounted while supporting Varina's unconscious form. After settling his horse with quick efficiency, he carried Varina toward the house. Her weight was slight in his arms, her skin alarmingly cold where it touched his neck. The only other occupant of the ranch was Ezra, the aging cook and general hand who'd stayed on after Ransom's father died. The old man's eyebrows shot up as Ransom shouldered through the door with his burden. Lord have mercy, Ezra muttered, wiping his hands on his apron. What have you gone and found now, boy? She's hurt, Ransom said, heading straight for the kitchen with its blazing hearth. Legs cut bad and she's half frozen. Ezra cleared space on the broad kitchen table without further question, though his worried glance spoke volumes. Indian woman, that'll cause talk. No one needs to know, Ransom said, laying Varina down gently. And I wasn't about to leave her to die. The warmth of the kitchen seemed to rouse Varina slightly. Her eyes opened, immediately alert and wary as she took in her surroundings. You're safe, Ransom assured her, stepping back to give her space. This is my ranch. We need to see to that leg. Varina's gaze moved between Ransom and Ezra, assessing potential threats with the instinct of someone long accustomed to danger. Finally, she nodded, though her body remained tense. I can tend to myself, she said firmly. I need clean water, bandages, and if you have them, herbs. Ezra muttered something about stubborn as a mule, but went to fetch the requested items. Ransom stood awkwardly by the hearth, suddenly aware of how little he knew about caring for injuries beyond the rough field medicine frontiersmen practiced. How'd you get hurt? He asked, watching as she examined her leg with clinical detachment. Hunting, she replied. I fell on rocks when snow collapsed beneath me. You're a long way from Apache territory. Her eyes flashed up to meet his, and you ask many questions of someone you just met. Ransom raised his hands in surrender. Fair enough, but you're in my house, eating my food, so I reckon I'm owed some answers eventually. Perhaps, she conceded, then grimaced as she shifted her leg. Or perhaps I will be gone by morning and you can forget you ever saw me. Blizzard set in, Ransom said, nodding toward the window where snow lashed against the glass. Nobody's going anywhere for at least a day or two. Ezra returned with the supplies, and Ransom watched with grudging respect as Varina cleaned and dressed her wound with practiced efficiency. Her hands moved with purpose, never hesitating despite the pain she must have felt. You've done that before, he observed. My people don't have doctors riding circuit, she replied dryly. We learn to care for ourselves. When she finished, Ezra brought a bowl of stew that had been simmering on the stove. Varina accepted it with dignified thanks, though Ransom noticed how she sniffed it cautiously before taking a small bite. It's not poisoned, he said, unable to keep irritation from his voice. Forgiveness if I don't immediately trust white hospitality, she replied evenly. My experience has been mixed. Ransom couldn't argue with that. The treatment of Indians by settlers and the military was often brutal, just as raids by various tribes had left their share of frontier graves. You can stay until your leg heals and the weather clears, he said finally. There's a small room off the kitchen Ezra uses for storage. We can clear it for you. Thank you, she said, the words formal but sincere. Later, after Ezra had prepared the small room with a cot and blankets, Ransom helped Varina settle in. Her steps were unsteady, but she refused to let him carry her, insisting on walking with just his arm for support. Why did you help me? She asked abruptly as they reached the doorway to her temporary quarters. Most white men would have left me. Ransom considered the question. Maybe I'm not most men. Or maybe you want something, she countered, dark eyes searching his. Just sleep, he said, stepping back. Tomorrow's soon enough for figuring the rest. That night, lying in his own bed, Ransom listened to the howl of the wind and thought about the woman sleeping under his roof. Bringing her here complicated everything. If word got out, it could cause problems with neighbors who held strong views about Indians. Yet leaving her had never been a real choice, not if he wanted to look at himself in the shaving mirror come morning. Still, he reminded himself this was temporary. Once the weather cleared and she could travel, Varina would go her way, and he would return to the solitary existence that had kept him safe from loss these past years. The frontier was no place for connections. They only gave you more to lose when the harsh land inevitably took its due. Morning brought clear skies, but temperatures cold enough to freeze breath. Ransom rose before dawn as usual, building up the fire and checking on the stock. When he returned to the kitchen, he found Varina already awake, seated at the table while Ezra prepared breakfast. How's the leg? Ransom asked, stomping snow from his boots. Better, she said. Your cook has interesting ideas about medicine. Ezra harumphed as he flipped cornbread on the griddle. Been doctoring men longer than you've been alive, missy. My poultice will have you walking proper by tomorrow. A ghost of a smile touched Varina's lips. I meant no offense, it smells like something my grandmother would make. Breakfast was a quiet affair, with Ezra doing most of the talking, sharing gossip from his last trip to town. Varina ate methodically, her posture perfect, answering direct questions but volunteering nothing. Ransom found himself studying her when he thought she wasn't looking, the graceful way she moved, the intelligence in her eyes, the careful reserve that suggested years of learning to hide her thoughts. "Where were you headed," he asked finally, "before you got hurt?" Varina set down her fork. "North, I have family near the Canadian border." "That's a long journey for a woman alone," Ransom observed. "I've been alone most of my life," she replied. "I know how to take care of myself." "Except when you don't," he countered, gesturing to her injured leg. Her eyes flashed. "Even the best hunters sometimes fall." "I would have managed." "You'd have frozen to death," Ransom said bluntly. "No shame in admitting it." "There is no shame in needing help," Varina agreed, "only in expecting it as your due." The response caught Ransom off guard. Most people he knew, especially men, would rather die than admit weakness. Her pragmatism was refreshing, even as her pride remained intact. "Well, you're welcome to stay until you're fit to travel," he said, rising from the table. "But I've got work to do, cattle don't feed themselves." "I can help," Varina offered, starting to stand, "with that leg." "You just slow me down," Ransom said, more harshly than he intended. The truth was, her presence unsettled him, better to keep his distance. Varina's expression closed like a door shutting. "Of course. I wouldn't want to be a burden." Ransom felt a twinge of regret but pushed it aside. Getting attached would only lead to complications. Better to maintain boundaries until she was gone. The day passed in the rhythm of ranch work, feeding livestock, breaking ice on water troughs, repairing tack that needed attention. When Ransom returned to the house in late afternoon, he found Varina seated by the kitchen window, sewing a tear in what appeared to be one of his shirts. "You don't need to do that," he said, hanging his coat by the door. "I pay my debts," she replied without looking up. "Your cook mentioned this needed mending." Ransom watched her hands move deftly with the needle, her stitches small and even. "Where'd you learn to sew like that?" "Mission school," she said, the words clipped. 3 years, they taught us to be proper ladies alongside reading and figures." There was a story there, Ransom sensed, but her tone discouraged questions. Instead, he pulled up a chair across from her. "My father used to say a person's hands tell their story," he said, watching her work. "Yours say you know both the old ways and the new." Varina glanced up, surprise briefly visible before her expression smoothed. "Your father sounds observant." "He was," Ransom agreed, a familiar ache rising at the memory. "Taught me most of what I know about ranching, about reading people." "And what do you read in me?" she asked, setting the shirt aside. Ransom studied her face, allowing himself to really look at her for the first time. Her features were striking, high cheekbones, full lips, and eyes that missed nothing. Her black hair fell in a thick braid over one shoulder, and though her clothing was practical frontier wear borrowed from the household stores, she carried herself with innate dignity. "Someone who's learned to be careful," he said finally. "Someone caught between worlds." A flash of something, recognition, perhaps, crossed her face before she masked it. "And you, Ransom Miller, what worlds do you stand between?" The question struck closer to home than he expected. "Just trying to keep this ranch alive. Don't have time for worlds beyond this one." "Yet you stopped to help a stranger," she observed. "That suggests a man who sees beyond his own fences." Before Ransom could respond, Ezra called them to dinner. The conversation shifted to safer ground, weather predictions, the condition of the cattle, news Ezra had heard about railroad expansion. Yet Ransom found himself unusually aware of Varina's presence across the table, the thoughtful way she listened, the careful consideration she gave before speaking. That night, unable to sleep, Ransom found himself drawn to the kitchen. He was surprised to find Varina there, seated by the banked fire, her face illuminated by the soft glow of coals. "Leg bothering you?" he asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot kept warm at the edge of the hearth. She shook her head. "I am used to pain, but dreams sometimes are harder to endure." Ransom sat in the chair opposite, understanding all too well. His own nights were often broken by memories, his brother's wasting illness, his father's final, struggling breaths. "Want to talk about it?" he offered, surprising himself. Varina regarded him thoughtfully. "Would you really want to hear?" "I asked, didn't I?" She was silent so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but steady. I dream of the day they came for us. I was 14. Soldiers surrounded our camp at dawn. They said we had to go to the reservation. My mother refused. She said we had papers, that my father was a white trader who had rights to the land. Varina's gaze remained fixed on the fire. They shot her for resisting. My father tried to stop them and died beside her. I ran. An aunt found me days later, half-starved, hiding in the mountains. Ransom felt the weight of her words like a physical burden. I'm sorry. Are you? She asked, not accusingly but with genuine curiosity. Most whites believe Indians are better dead or confined. I believe in judging people by their actions, not where they were born or how they look, Ransom said. My father taught me that much. A rare lesson on the frontier, Varina observed. My father was a rare man. Ransom sipped his coffee, memories surfacing. Came west with nothing but determination after my mother died. Built this ranch from scratch, raised me and my brother to believe in hard work and treating people fair. You miss them, she said, not a question but a recognition. Every day, Ransom admitted, the word catching in his throat. Lost my brother to consumption 3 years back. Father followed 6 months later. Doctors said it was his heart, but I think it was grief. And now you are alone, Varina said softly. By choice, Ransom clarified, needing her to understand. Safer that way. Is it? Her dark eyes reflected firelight. Or is it just easier to believe that's true? The question lingered between them, uncomfortably perceptive. Ransom stood abruptly. You should rest. That leg won't heal if you don't sleep. Varina nodded, accepting his retreat. Thank you for the company, Ransom Miller. It has been a long time since I spoke of these things. Yeah, well, he shifted awkwardly. Sometimes talking helps, I guess. As he returned to his room, Ransom found himself unsettled by their conversation. He'd revealed more to this woman in one night than he had to anyone in years. Worse, her words had struck a chord he wasn't ready to acknowledge, that perhaps his isolation wasn't protection but a prison of his own making. The next morning brought a change in the weather, a warm Chinook wind that began melting the snow. Ransom spent the day checking on cattle, relieved to find they'd weathered the storm with minimal losses. When he returned to the ranch house, he found Varina in the kitchen, stirring something that filled the room with an unfamiliar but appealing aroma. Your cook allowed me use of his domain, she explained, noticing his surprise. He went to town for supplies now that the roads are clearing. You didn't need to cook, Ransom said, hanging up his coat. I wanted to, Varina replied. It is a small way to repay hospitality. The meal she prepared was unlike anything Ransom had tasted before. Venison stew seasoned with wild herbs and served with cornbread made from Ezra's recipe, but with her own additions. They ate in companionable silence until Ransom finally spoke. With the snow melting, you'll be able to travel soon. Varina nodded, her expression carefully neutral. Yes. I should be able to continue my journey within a day or two. I could take you as far as Helena, Ransom offered. You'd have better luck finding transportation north from there. That is generous, she said, but unnecessary. I have already imposed enough. It's not an imposition, Ransom insisted, though he couldn't explain why her leaving suddenly bothered him. It's dangerous country for anyone traveling alone. As I told you before. I know. You can take care of yourself, Ransom interrupted, but even the best hunters sometimes fall right. A reluctant smile curved her lips at having her own words turned back on her. Perhaps you are right. I will consider your offer. After dinner, they sat by the fire, an unexpected ease developing between them. Varina asked about the ranch, and Ransom found himself sharing stories of his childhood, of learning to ride and rope, of the dreams his father had for expanding their herd. You speak of him with great respect, Varina observed. He deserved it, Ransom said. Treated everyone fair, settlers, Indians, Chinese workers on the railroad. Plenty of folks around here thought he was a fool for it. And what do you think? Ransom considered the question. I think he was right about people, even if it made life harder sometimes. But, she prompted when he hesitated. But he loved too easily, Ransom admitted, gave too much of himself. When my brother got sick, it broke something in him. I watched him pour everything into trying to save James, then just fade away after we buried him. So you learned to hold yourself apart, Varina said softly. To protect yourself from such pain. Ransom stared into the fire, uncomfortable with her insight. Frontier's a harsh place, can't afford to be soft. There is a difference between softness and connection, she said. My people believe that to be truly alone is the greatest poverty. Maybe, Ransom conceded, but it's also the safest way to live out here. Varina's eyes held his. Is a safe life worth living if it holds no joy? The question lingered between them, unanswered but unsettling. Ransom excused himself soon after, retreating to the familiar solitude of his room. Yet sleep eluded him as Varina's words echoed in his mind. Had he chosen safety at the cost of everything that made life worth living, the next morning dawned clear and mild, the snow retreating further. Ransom found Ezra in the kitchen, returned from town with supplies and news. Cavalry's camped at Weston's place, the old cook reported as he unpacked provisions, looking for Indians who broke from the reservation. Ransom's stomach tightened. How many? Small group from what I heard, Ezra said, 5 maybe 6. They're searching all the ranches in the valley. They have no right to search private property, Ransom said, though he knew such niceties rarely stopped the military. Tell that to Lieutenant Warren, Ezra snorted. Man's got a reputation for not asking politely. Heard he strung up a settler last year for harboring a Blackfoot family. Ransom glanced toward the small room where Varina was presumably still sleeping. When are they likely to reach us? Day after tomorrow maybe, Ezra estimated, they're being thorough. The conversation halted as Varina appeared in the doorway, her face composed but her eyes alert. Ransom knew immediately that she'd overheard. I should leave today, she said without preamble. I won't bring trouble to your door. Nonsense, Ezra declared before Ransom could speak. Girl with your leg can't travel far enough fast enough. They'd catch you before sundown. He's right, Ransom said, mind racing, but we need to think of something. Varina shook her head. I won't ask you to risk yourselves. This is my problem. Became our problem when Ransom brought you through that door, Ezra said matter-of-factly. Besides, I've never had much use for the cavalry, bunch of Eastern boys playing soldier, most of them. Ransom considered their options. Hiding Varina on the ranch was risky, the cavalry would search thoroughly. Trying to smuggle her out was equally dangerous with patrols in the area. The old line shack, he said finally, up in the north pasture. It's remote enough they might not bother checking, especially this time of year. Good thinking, Ezra nodded. Stocked it myself before the snow, has provisions to last weeks if needed. I cannot ask this of you, Varina protested. If they find me there. We'll say you stole a horse and supplies, Ransom cut in. That we had no idea, but they won't find you if we're careful. Her eyes searched his. Why would you take such a risk for me? Ransom found he had no ready answer that didn't reveal more than he was prepared to admit, even to himself. Because it's the right thing to do, he said finally, knowing it was only part of the truth. They spent the day preparing. Ezra packed additional supplies while Ransom planned the safest route to the line shack, located in a wooded draw that provided natural concealment. Varina insisted on helping despite her injury, organizing provisions with quiet efficiency. As dusk approached, Ransom saddled Domino and a sturdy bay mare for Varina. The temperature was dropping again, but the sky remained clear, stars beginning to appear against the deepening blue. You sure about this? Ezra asked as Ransom secured the last of the supplies. Not too late to change your mind. I'm sure, Ransom said, surprised by his own certainty. Keep things normal here. If they come asking, you haven't seen any Indians, just me and my antisocial ways. Been telling that story for years, Ezra chuckled. Won't be hard to believe. Varina emerged from the house dressed in warm clothing Ezra had found, a man's coat and trousers that would allow her to ride astride despite her injury. Her hair was tucked beneath a worn slouch hat, and she moved with determination despite the slight limp. Thank you, she said to Ezra, for everything. The old man waved away her gratitude. Just come back when it's safe so I can make sure that leg heals proper. Can't trust this one to doctor worth a damn. He jerked a thumb toward Ransom. Varina's mouth curved in a small smile. I will remember. The ride to the line shack took nearly 2 hours, following game trails and creek beds to minimize their tracks. Ransom led the way, alert for any sign of patrols, though the gathering darkness provided good cover. Varina followed silently, never complaining despite what must have been considerable pain from her injured leg. The line shack was a simple one-room structure built of rough logs, used during the summer months when cattle grazed in the high pasture. Inside was Spartan but serviceable, a bunk, small stove, table and chair, with shelves holding basic supplies. "It's not much," Ransom apologized as he lit the lantern. "It is palace compared to some places I have sheltered," Varina said, examining the space. "It will serve well." Ransom built a fire in the small stove, careful to use only dry wood that would produce minimal smoke. As warmth gradually filled the cabin, he explained the layout of the surrounding area. "Creek's just down the slope there, though it might be frozen. There's a spring that never freezes about 100 yards behind the cabin." He pointed out landmarks visible from the single window. "If you need to hide in a hurry, there's a stand of pines to the west that's thick enough to disappear in." Varina listened attentively, committing each detail to memory. When he finished, she said simply, "Thank you, Ransom Miller. Few would risk what you are risking." Her gratitude made him uncomfortable, "Just doing what my father would have done." "I think you are doing what you believe is right," she countered. "That speaks to your character, not just your upbringing." Ransom busied himself arranging supplies, unsettled by her perception. "I should head back before it gets too late, easier to hide our tracks in the dark." "Of course," Varina nodded. "How long should I remain here?" "Give it a week," Ransom advised. "By then, they should have moved on. I'll try to check on you in a few days if I can get away without raising suspicion." He moved toward the door, suddenly reluctant to leave. Varina stood near the stove, firelight playing across her features, making her beauty all the more striking. "Be careful," he said awkwardly. "Don't use the stove during the day if you can help it." "Smoke might be seen." "I know how to remain hidden," she assured him. "I have had much practice." The sadness underlying her words struck Ransom with unexpected force. What must it be like to live always on alert, always viewed with suspicion or outright hostility? "This won't always be your life," he said impulsively. "Having to hide, I mean." Varina's smile was tinged with gentle skepticism. "Perhaps, but I have learned to live in the world as it is, not as I wish it to be." Ransom nodded, respecting her pragmatism even as he wished he could offer more hope. "I'll return soon," he promised, and stepped out into the night. The ride back to the ranch gave Ransom too much time to think. He found himself worrying about Varina alone in the lined shack, wondering if her leg would heal properly, if she had enough blankets to stay warm. More troubling were the questions he couldn't answer. Why her safety mattered so much to him, why the thought of her continuing her journey northward left an emptiness he couldn't explain. Ezra was waiting when he returned, a cup of coffee and plate of food ready. "Everything go all right?" the old man asked. "Fine," Ransom said, shedding his coat. "She's settled in. Should be safe enough there until the cavalry moves on." Ezra studied him with knowing eyes. "She's got to you, hasn't she?" "Don't know what you're talking about," Ransom muttered, focusing on his food. "Course you don't," Ezra chuckled. "Just like your father, pretending not to care when you care the most." "She'll be moving on as soon as it's safe," Ransom said firmly. "Heading north to family, nothing for her here." "If you say so," Ezra replied, clearly unconvinced. "Just remember, boy, this ranch is mighty empty for one man alone." Ransom ignored the comment, but it followed him to bed, joining Varina's words about safety versus joy. He'd convinced himself that solitude was strength, that connections were vulnerability. Yet in the days since bringing Varina to the ranch, he'd felt more alive than he had in years. The cavalry arrived 2 days later, 6 men led by Lieutenant Warren, a hard-faced officer with cold eyes and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Ransom met them in the yard, outwardly calm despite his racing heart. "Lieutenant," he greeted without warmth, "what brings the army to Box M?" "Routine patrol, Mr. Miller," Warren replied, dismounting with practiced ease. "Looking for Indians who have left the reservation without authorization." "Haven't seen any," Ransom said truthfully enough. Varina wasn't from any reservation. "Just me and my cook here." Warren's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "You wouldn't mind if we have a look around then, simply procedure." It wasn't a request, Ransom shrugged. "Help yourself." "Not much to see." The soldiers searched the ranch house, barn, and outbuildings with methodical thoroughness. Ransom followed Warren, keeping his expression neutral as the officer examined every room, opening closets and even checking under beds. "Quite isolated out here, Mr. Miller," Warren observed as they returned to the kitchen. "Don't you find it lonely?" "Suits me," Ransom replied shortly, "never been one for crowds." Warren ran a finger along the kitchen table. "Your cook keeps a tidy house, almost as if expecting company." "Ezra's particular that way," Ransom said, fighting to keep his voice even. "Military man himself, once upon a time, old habits." Warren's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is that so? Which regiment?" "You'd have to ask him," Ransom deflected, "before my time." The lieutenant seemed about to press the point when one of his men appeared in the doorway. "Sir, we've checked all buildings." "Nothing to report." Warren's gaze lingered on Ransom's face before he nodded. "Very well, thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Miller. We'll be moving on." "Good hunting," Ransom said with calculated indifference. Only after the soldiers had ridden well beyond the ranch boundaries did Ransom allow himself to relax. Ezra emerged from the barn where he'd been politely but firmly kept under observation during the search. "Thought they'd never leave," the old man grumbled. "Lieutenant kept asking about my service. Had to make up a whole campaign in Mexico to satisfy him." "You think they believed us?" Ransom asked, watching the distant riders. "Hard to say," Ezra admitted. "That Warren's a suspicious sort. Wouldn't put it past him to have men watching the ranch." The possibility sent a chill through Ransom. "Think I should warn Varina." Ezra considered this. "Might be wise, but wait till morning, do your normal chores first. Don't give them any reason to think you're up to something." The night passed slowly, Ransom's sleep broken by vivid dreams of Varina in danger, of soldiers finding the line shack while he was too far away to help. At first light he rose and went about his morning routine with forced normalcy, aware that watchful eyes might be observing the ranch. Mid-morning he casually mentioned to Ezra, loud enough for any potential observers to hear, that he needed to check the north pasture fence line, damaged in the recent storm. With rifle and tools strapped to his saddle, he set out, taking a circuitous route that would eventually lead to the line shack. Twice he doubled back, watching for signs of being followed. Satisfied he was alone, Ransom finally approached the small cabin, relief flooding through him at the thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney. He dismounted and approached cautiously, calling out before reaching the door. "Varina." "It's Ransom." The door opened immediately, revealing Varina with a rifle ready in her hands. Her face relaxed at the sight of him, but her eyes remained alert. "Did they come?" "Yesterday," Ransom confirmed, stepping inside. "Searched the place but didn't find anything suspicious. I think they've moved on, but Ezra's worried they might be watching the ranch." Varina nodded, setting aside the rifle. "It would be what I would do if I were hunting someone." Ransom noticed she moved with less difficulty, her limp less pronounced. "Legs better." "Yes," she said, "your cook's poultice worked well. Another few days, and I should be able to travel without difficulty." The news should have pleased him, but Ransom felt an unexpected hollowness instead. "That's good," he managed. "Once we're sure the cavalry's moved on, we can figure out getting you to Helena." Varina studied his face. "You seem troubled." "Just concerned about the cavalry," Ransom deflected. "Warren didn't strike me as the type to give up easily." "No," Varina agreed softly. "Men like him rarely do." She gestured to the small table. "Will you sit? I made tea from pine needles." "Not as good as proper tea, but it helps with the cold." Ransom accepted the crude cup she offered, the sharp, resinous scent of pine rising with the steam. They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Varina spoke. "Tell me about your ranch," she said. "What dreams do you have for it?" The question surprised him. Dreams, haven't thought much beyond survival these past years, keeping the cattle healthy, paying the bank notes. "But before," Varina prompted. "When your father and brother were alive." Ransom stared into his cup, memories surfacing. "We had plans. Father wanted to expand north, breed better stock. James had ideas about planting apple orchards along the creek." He smiled faintly. "Said we could make cider to sell in Helena, make a name for Box M beyond just cattle." "Good dreams," Varina said. "Why did you set them aside?" "Didn't see the point," Ransom admitted. "Without them, it was just about keeping the ranch going, honoring what my father built." "But not building anything new," she observed, "just preserving." Her insight struck uncomfortably close to home. What about you? He countered. What dreams take you north? Varina's expression softened. My mother's sister lives with a band of mixed bloods near the border. They have built a community where both worlds are honored, the old ways and the new. I have lived between these worlds all my life, never fully belonging to either. And you think you'll find belonging there? Ransom asked. I hope, she said simply. Hope is a luxury I allow myself rarely, but in this, I permit it. Something in her words resonated deeply with Ransom. How long had it been since he'd allowed himself to hope for more than mere survival? Since he dreamed beyond the next season, the next cattle drive. I should get back, he said, suddenly needing space from the emotions her presence stirred. Don't want to be gone too long and raise suspicions. Varina nodded, of course. Thank you for the warning about the cavalry. I'll return in 2 days, Ransom promised. Bring more supplies. He was nearly to the door when Varina spoke again. Ransom, be careful. Men like Lieutenant Warren see threats everywhere, especially in kindness to those they consider enemies. I can handle Warren, Ransom assured her, though her concern warmed him. I have no doubt, she said with the hint of a smile. But I would rest easier knowing you take no unnecessary risks on my account. The ride back to the ranch gave Ransom too much time with his thoughts. Varina's presence in his life, brief as it had been, had shifted something fundamental. The carefully constructed walls he'd built after his family's deaths were developing cracks, letting in feelings he'd sworn to avoid, connection, concern, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. Ezra was waiting in the barn when Ransom returned, ostensibly mending harness but clearly on lookout duty. Any trouble? The old man asked. None, Ransom reported, unsaddling Domino. She's doing well. Legs healing clean. Good, Ezra nodded. No sign of the cavalry returning, but Jim Peters rode by earlier. Said they're still in the valley, set up camp by the creek on Weston's property. So they haven't moved on, Ransom frowned. Think they suspect something. Hard to say, Ezra admitted. Peters said they've been searching every ranch, every homestead. Seem mighty determined for just a handful of reservation Indians. That night Ransom found sleep elusive. He kept thinking about Varina alone in the line shack, about the cavalry camped nearby, about the future stretching before him once she was gone. The emptiness of that future troubled him more than he wanted to admit. The next day brought unexpected news. Ezra returned from a supply run to town with information that set Ransom's nerves on edge. Cavalry's not just looking for any Indians, the old cook reported. They're after someone specific. Half-Apache woman, daughter of a trader named Mantooth. Ransom kept his expression carefully neutral. What's so special about her? Story goes she has papers proving her father had legal claim to land the army wants for a new fort, Ezra explained. Warren's been ordered to find her and the papers before she can file claim in court. That's why they're so determined, Ransom realized. It's not about reservation Indians at all. Nope, Ezra confirmed. It's about land and money, same as most troubles out here. The revelation changed everything. This wasn't just about helping Varina reach her family, it was about justice, about standing against the kind of corruption that treated people as obstacles to be removed. I need to warn her, Ransom said, already calculating how soon he could safely visit the line shack again. Might be best to move her, Ezra suggested. If they're this determined, they won't give up easily. Might start searching outlying buildings, line shacks. Ransom nodded grimly. We need somewhere they've already looked, somewhere they won't think to check again. They formulated a plan. The root cellar beneath the barn had been overlooked during the cavalry's search, a small chamber accessed through a trapdoor usually covered by hay bales. It was crude but could serve as temporary shelter until they could arrange safe passage north. The next morning, Ransom set out before dawn, taking a roundabout route to the line shack. The valley was shrouded in mist as he approached, the small cabin barely visible through the gray veil. Something felt wrong even before he dismounted, a stillness too complete, an absence of the small sounds that should have greeted him. He approached cautiously, hand on his revolver. The door of the cabin stood slightly ajar. Heart-pounding, Ransom pushed it open to find the interior empty, signs of hasty departure evident in the scattered blankets and abandoned provisions. A wave of panic swept through him until he noticed the small mark carved beside the door frame, 3 parallel lines, a signal. Varina had left voluntarily, not been taken. But why, and where would she go? The answer came in the form of fresh hoofprints leading away from the cabin, cavalry mounts, at least 4 horses. They must have found the line shack, but apparently arrived after Varina had already fled. Ransom studied the ground carefully, looking for any sign of which direction she might have taken. There, barely visible among the other tracks, the print of a smaller horse, heading not north toward the border but east toward the mountains. Varina was making for the high country, where dense forests and rocky terrain would make tracking difficult. Ransom hesitated only briefly before following. The cavalry would be searching as well, and Varina was still recovering from her injury. Alone in the mountains, with winter not yet fully retreated, her chances were slim. The tracking was difficult, Varina clearly using every trick she knew to hide her trail. Ransom followed more by intuition than clear sign, guessing which routes she would choose based on what he'd learned of her in their brief time together, her practicality, her knowledge of survival, her careful planning. By midday he'd reached the foothills, the terrain growing steeper and more challenging. The horse tracks had disappeared entirely on the rocky ground, forcing Ransom to search for subtler signs, a broken twig, disturbed moss, anything that might indicate human passage. It was nearly sunset when he found her. A thin column of smoke, almost invisible against the darkening sky, rose from a sheltered ravine. Ransom approached cautiously, aware that Varina would be on high alert. "Varina," he called softly, staying behind cover. "It's Ransom." Silence greeted him, then a rustle of movement from behind a stand of pines. "Show yourself," came her voice, tense with caution. Ransom stepped into the small clearing, hands visible. "It's just me." The cavalry found the line shack. Varina emerged from the trees, rifle lowered but ready. They came at dawn. "I heard them approaching and escaped before they arrived." Her eyes narrowed. "How did you find me?" "Wasn't easy," Ransom admitted. "You cover your tracks well. Yet here you are." Her expression was guarded, assessing. "I know why they're looking for you," Ransom said. "It's about your father's land claim." Surprise flickered across her face before she masked it. "Who told you this?" "Ezra heard it in town. The army wants land for a new fort, but your father's claim stands in the way." He took a step closer. "That's why you were heading north, not just to find family, but to file the claim papers somewhere the army has less influence." Varina was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "My father left me papers proving his right to the land, 3,000 acres along the Bitterroot River, land that has been in my mother's people's territory for generations. And now the army wants it," Ransom concluded. "They offered to buy it from me after my parents died," Varina explained, "for a fraction of its value. When I refused, they declared me an unauthorized Indian outside the reservation system." Her mouth curved in a bitter smile. "Convenient how laws change when there is something of value at stake." "You can't stay here," Ransom said, glancing at the darkening sky. "Winter's not done with these mountains. And the cavalry won't give up searching." "I have survived winters before," Varina countered, "and I won't risk bringing more trouble to your door." "We have a plan," Ransom insisted. "A place they've already searched and won't look again. Just until we can arrange safe passage north." Varina studied him, her dark eyes searching his face. "Why are you doing this, Ransom Miller? Why risk everything for someone you barely know?" The question demanded honesty, and Ransom found he could no longer evade the truth, even to himself. "Because in the short time I've known you, I've felt more alive than I have in years. Because helping you isn't just the right thing to do, it's what I want to do." His admission hung between them, more revealing than he'd intended. Varina's expression softened, vulnerability briefly visible beneath her carefully maintained strength. "I cannot ask this of you," she said quietly. "You didn't ask," Ransom pointed out. "I'm offering." After a long moment, Varina nodded. "Very well, but if there is any sign of danger to you or Ezra, I will leave. This is my fight, not yours." "Let's get through the night first," Ransom suggested, glancing around the small camp. "Too risky to travel in the dark. We'll head back at first light." They shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack Ransom had brought in his saddlebags. As night settled fully around them, the temperature dropped sharply, prompting Ransom to build up the small fire. "How did you end up with your father's land papers?" he asked as they sat close to the flames. Most men wouldn't entrust such things to a daughter, especially in those days. "My father was not most men," Varina replied, a hint of pride in her voice. He believed women could think as well as men, perhaps better. He taught me to read contracts, to understand boundaries and legal terms. Her expression grew distant. He said knowledge was the only weapon that never failed or ran out of ammunition. Sounds like a wise man, Ransom observed. He was, Varina agreed, though many thought him foolish for marrying my mother, for living among her people. He could have had an easier life. But not a better one, Ransom suggested. Varina's smile was warm in the firelight. No, not a better one. He used to say that the heart knows its home, even when the mind makes objections. They talked late into the night, sharing stories of their families, their childhoods. Ransom found himself speaking of things he hadn't discussed in years: his mother's death when he was young, his brother's dreams for the ranch, the lessons his father had taught him about respecting the land and all who lived on it. "You are more like your father than you realize," Varina observed as the fire burned low. "You carry his principles, his sense of justice." "I've tried," Ransom admitted. "Sometimes I think I've failed him. The ranch isn't what it was when he was alive." "Perhaps because you have been maintaining rather than building," Varina suggested gently, "preserving his dream instead of creating your own." The insight struck Ransom with unexpected force. She was right. He'd been so focused on honoring his father's memory that he'd stopped imagining a future beyond mere survival. The revelation was both uncomfortable and liberating. They slept in shifts, one keeping watch while the other rested. Ransom found it difficult to sleep, too aware of Varina nearby, too conscious of the danger that surrounded them. The cavalry could return to the line shack at any time, might expand their search to the mountains. Dawn brought clear skies and a plan. They would travel separately, Varina taking a longer route that avoided open country, Ransom returning directly to the ranch to prepare the root cellar and ensure no soldiers lingered nearby. "If all is clear, I'll leave the barn door open," Ransom explained. "If there's danger, I'll close it. Either way, wait until full dark before approaching." Varina nodded, her expression solemn. "If anything happens, if I don't arrive or if there's trouble, don't wait for me. Protect yourself and Ezra first." "That's not how this works," Ransom said firmly. "We're in this together now." Something flickered in Varina's eyes, surprise perhaps, or a deeper emotion she quickly masked. "Together," she repeated softly, as if testing the word. They parted with reluctance, Varina heading into the deeper forest while Ransom took the more direct route home. The ride gave him time to consider their situation: the cavalry's determination, the legal battle Varina faced, the growing certainty that his life had changed irrevocably since finding her in the snow. The ranch appeared peaceful when he arrived, no sign of soldiers or unwelcome visitors. Ezra met him in the barn, relief evident on the old man's weathered face. "Started to worry," he admitted. "Found the shack empty." Ransom quickly explained what had happened, Varina's escape and their plan for her to come after dark. Ezra nodded approvingly. "Girls got spirit," he said, "and smarts. Good combination." They spent the day preparing the root cellar, making it as comfortable as possible with blankets, lanterns, and supplies that could last several days if needed. Ransom found himself checking the road frequently, watching for any sign of the cavalry's return. As dusk approached, tension mounted. Ransom left the barn door open as planned, then took up position by the house window, rifle ready. Ezra maintained his normal routine, starting dinner preparations with deliberate normalcy in case they were being observed. Full dark had just settled when Ransom spotted movement near the edge of the property, a shadow detaching from the tree line, moving with cautious grace toward the barn. He watched, breath held, as Varina made her way across the open ground, disappearing into the barn's darkness. Only when she was safely inside did Ransom release the breath he'd been holding. He waited another 20 minutes before casually walking out to close the barn for the night, as he would on any normal evening. Inside, he found Varina already descending the ladder to the root cellar, her movements hampered slightly by her injury but determined. "All clear," he assured her, following her down. "No sign of the cavalry." The root cellar was cramped but serviceable, perhaps 12 feet square, with rough plank walls and a dirt floor. The lantern cast warm light over the space, revealing their preparations. "This will do well," Varina said, surveying the makeshift shelter. "How long must I stay?" "Just until we're sure they've moved on," Ransom said. "Ezra's got a friend in Helena who drives freight north. He might be able to take you if we can get you there safely." Varina nodded, though Ransom thought he detected a flicker of something like disappointment cross her face. A good plan. I'll bring food later, Ransom promised. After Ezra and I have eaten, less suspicious that way. He returned to the house, where Ezra had prepared a hearty stew. They ate in companionable silence, both men aware of the risk they were taking, neither needing to acknowledge it aloud. She settled in all right, Ezra finally asked as they cleared the dishes. As well as can be expected, Ransom replied. It's not comfortable, but it's safe. Ezra studied him thoughtfully. You know, there are other options besides sending her north. Like what? Ransom asked, though something in him already knew what the old man would suggest. Like helping her fight for her land, Ezra said. Mantuth's claim is legal. With the right lawyer, she could win. Against the United States Army, Ransom scoffed. That's not a fight anyone wins. Depends on what winning means, Ezra countered. Sometimes just taking a stand is victory enough. The old cook's words lingered as Ransom prepared a plate for Varina, adding a slice of apple pie Ezra had baked that morning. Fighting for her land meant Varina would stay, a prospect that both thrilled and terrified him. It would mean stepping fully into conflict with the army, risking everything his family had built. Yet the alternative, helping her flee north, perhaps never seeing her again, left a hollowness in his chest he couldn't ignore. When he descended into the root cellar with the food, he found Varina examining a book she'd discovered among the storage shelves, an old volume of poetry his mother had loved, somehow ending up among the preserved vegetables and tool storage. Wordsworth, she said, looking up as he approached. Your mother had excellent taste. Ransom set down the plate, surprised. You've read Wordsworth. Mission school, Varina reminded him with a small smile. They believed poetry would civilize the savage heart. Instead, it simply gave us words for what we already knew, that beauty exists everywhere, even in places others see only wilderness. My mother used to read those poems aloud, Ransom said, the memory bittersweet. Father said he didn't understand half of them, but he loved to hear her voice. Will you read one? Varina asked, holding out the book. The evenings are long down here. The request caught Ransom off guard, but he found himself settling beside her on the rough bench, taking the book with careful hands. He turned to a dog-eared page, his mother's favorite poem marked by years of reading. As he read, the cramped root cellar seemed to expand around them, the words creating a space beyond their immediate circumstances. Varina listened intently, her face illuminated by lantern light, revealing an openness he rarely saw in her carefully guarded expressions. When he finished, silence settled between them, comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, Varina spoke. Your mother chose well, she said softly. Words that speak of finding home in the natural world in the quiet moments others might overlook. She always said poetry helped her see beyond the hardships of frontier life, Ransom admitted. I never fully understood what she meant until, Varina prompted when he hesitated. Until recently, he finished, not quite ready to admit that his changing perspective coincided precisely with her arrival in his life. They talked late into the night, Ransom reluctant to return to the main house despite the risk of his extended absence being noticed. Varina shared stories of her childhood, moving between her mother's people and the white settlements, learning to navigate both worlds while fully belonging to neither. It was a lonely path, she acknowledged, but it taught me to see with different eyes, to understand that truth often depends on where you stand. Is that why you want to claim your father's land? Ransom asked. To have a place to stand that's truly yours. Varina considered this, partly, but also because it is the right thing. That land should not be taken simply because those who want it have more power. Some principles are worth fighting for, even when victory seems unlikely. Her conviction stirred something in Ransom, a recognition of the same values his father had instilled in him, values he'd allowed to grow dormant in the years of lonely survival. What if you didn't have to fight alone? He asked, the words emerging before he'd fully formed the thought. Varina's gaze sharpened. What do you mean? Ezra mentioned that with the right lawyer your claim could stand. It's legal, documented. The army can't simply take what's yours because they want it. Ransom leaned forward, warming to the idea. Helena has good lawyers. One in particular, Joseph Calloway, handled land disputes for my father. He knows the law and isn't afraid of confrontation. You are suggesting I stay and fight, Varina said, watching his face carefully. Rather than flee north. It's your decision, Ransom said quickly. I'm just saying there might be options besides running. And why would you care which path I choose? Varina asked, her question direct but her tone gentle. Ransom found himself at a crossroads: continue the careful distance he'd maintained from emotions since his family's deaths, or acknowledge the truth that had been growing clearer each day. "Because I've come to care what happens to you," he admitted. "More than I expected, more than makes sense for someone I've known such a short time." Varina's expression softened. "Time is not always the measure of connection, Ransom Miller." "No," he agreed, holding her gaze. "I'm beginning to understand that." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Varina reached out, her hand covering his where it rested on the bench. "I will consider staying," she said. "But not if it brings danger to you and Ezra. This is my fight." "Some fights are worth sharing," Ransom replied, turning his hand to clasp hers. "My father taught me that much." The next 3 days established a routine. Varina remained hidden in the root cellar, emerging only briefly at night for fresh air when they were certain no one was watching the ranch. Ransom and Ezra maintained normal operations, careful not to draw attention or appear suspicious. On the 4th day, news arrived via a neighbor stopping by with mail from town. The cavalry had broken camp at Weston's property and moved south, apparently giving up their search of the Bitterroot Valley. "Could be a trick," Ezra cautioned. "Pretending to leave while keeping eyes on suspected places." "We'll wait another day or two," Ransom agreed. "Make sure they're really gone." That night he shared the news with Varina, finding her reading by lantern light, her posture relaxed in a way he hadn't seen before. "So I may emerge from my burrow soon," she said with a small smile. "I admit, I have developed new appreciation for sunlight." "Soon," Ransom promised, "though we should still be cautious about who sees you." Varina set aside her book. "I have been thinking about what you said, about fighting for the land claim rather than fleeing north." And Ransom tried to keep his tone neutral, though his heart quickened. "I believe you are right," she said. "Running solves nothing. The land is rightfully mine, and I should defend that right through proper channels." Relief and something deeper flooded through Ransom. "We can ride to Helena when it's safe, speak to Calloway. If anyone can help navigate the legal issues, it's him." Varina raised an eyebrow. "You intend to accompany me?" "If you'll allow it," Ransom said. "Two is safer than one on the road. And I've known Calloway for years. He's more likely to take the case if I introduce you." Varina studied him, her expression thoughtful. "There is another matter to consider. If I stay to fight this battle, I will need somewhere to live. The cavalry knows to look for me in this valley." The implication hung between them, unspoken but clear. Ransom took a breath, then made the offer that had been forming in his mind for days. "Stay here," he said simply. "The ranch is remote enough that we can keep your presence quiet until the legal matters are settled. And after that—" He hesitated, then continued. "After that you could stay on if you wanted." "As what, Ransom Miller?" Varina asked softly. "A hired hand, a guest?" The directness of her question demanded equal honesty. "As whatever you want to be," he said. "The ranch has room for dreams beyond what it is now, room for orchards along the creek, for new ideas, room for partnership." The word carried weight beyond its simple meaning, and they both knew it. Varina's eyes never left his face, searching for something, certainty, perhaps, or the courage to voice what had been growing between them. "You once told me the frontier was no place for attachments," she reminded him. "That isolation was safer." "I was wrong," Ransom admitted. "These past weeks have shown me that surviving isn't the same as living." Varina's expression softened. "And is that what you want now? To live rather than merely survive?" "With you," he said, the words both terrifying and liberating, "if you'll consider it." For a long moment Varina was silent, her face unreadable. Then slowly she reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his. "I have lived between worlds all my life," she said, "never fully belonging anywhere. Perhaps it is time to build a world rather than search for one." The simple acceptance in her words filled Ransom with a joy he'd almost forgotten was possible. Before he could respond, a sudden noise from above the barn door opening froze them both. "Ransom," Ezra's voice called softly, "you down there?" "Here," Ransom answered, reluctantly releasing Varina's hand. "What is it?" "Riders coming," Ezra reported as Ransom climbed the ladder. "Army uniforms, looks like Warren's back." Dread settled in Ransom's stomach. "How many?" "Just two, Warren and one other." Ezra's expression was grim. "They're coming straight to the house." Varina stays hidden, Ransom decided immediately. I'll handle Warren. Be careful, Varina called from below. Men like him are most dangerous when they believe they're losing. Ransom hurried to the house, composing himself to appear calm and unsurprised when the lieutenant arrived. He was sitting casually at the kitchen table, coffee mug in hand, when the knock came. Lieutenant Warren stood on the porch, his uniform immaculate despite days in the field. Beside him was a younger soldier, hand resting near his holstered pistol. "Lieutenant," Ransom greeted coolly, "thought you'd moved on." "Official business brings me back, Mr. Miller," Warren replied. "May we come in?" Ransom stepped aside, gesturing them into the kitchen where Ezra stood by the stove, face carefully blank. Warren removed his hat but remained standing, studying the room with calculating eyes. "We've received information that you might be harboring a fugitive," he said without preamble, "an Apache woman named Varina Mantooth." "That's so," Ransom kept his expression neutral. "And who provided this information?" "A concerned citizen," Warren said smoothly. "Someone who saw you with an Indian woman before our first visit." Ransom's mind raced, trying to remember if anyone could have seen him bringing Varina to the ranch during the blizzard. It was possible a neighbor perhaps glimpsing them through the storm. "I haven't seen any Apache women," Ransom said, technically truthful. Varina was half Apache, half white. "Feel free to search the place again if you don't believe me." Warren's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, we will, but first I think we should discuss the penalties for harboring fugitives. Quite severe, especially when military interests are involved." "Are they?" Ransom asked innocently. "I thought you were just rounding up reservation Indians." A flash of irritation crossed Warren's face. "Don't play games, Miller. We know the Mantooth woman has documents that could complicate government plans. Turning her in would be considered a patriotic act." "I'll be sure to do that if I see her," Ransom replied evenly. Warren stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Think carefully about your position, Miller. This ranch of yours, lovely property, would be a shame if questions arose about your claim. Land office records can be so easily misplaced." The threat was unmistakable. Ransom felt anger rise but kept it carefully contained. "Are you threatening me, Lieutenant?" "Simply pointing out realities," Warren said. "Cooperation makes life easier for everyone." Before Ransom could respond, the door opened and Varina stepped inside. She stood straight despite her still healing leg, her expression composed and dignified. "If you wish to speak of me," she said calmly, "you can speak to me directly." Warren's eyes widened in surprise before narrowing with satisfaction. "Miss Mantooth, I presume. How convenient that you've decided to join us." Ransom moved to stand beside her, heart pounding but face resolute. "She's here legally, Warren, a guest in my home." "A fugitive," Warren corrected, "wanted for questioning regarding reservation violations." "I am not reservation Apache," Varina said clearly. "I am a free citizen through my father's status, with legal right to travel and reside where I choose." Warren's smile was cold. "That's for proper authorities to determine. In the meantime, you'll be coming with us." "No," Ransom said firmly. "She won't." The lieutenant's hand moved to his pistol. "This isn't a negotiation, Miller. Stand aside." "This is my property," Ransom countered, "and she's under my protection. You have no warrant, no legal cause to take her." "I don't need one," Warren sneered. "Army jurisdiction." "Doesn't apply here," interrupted a new voice from the doorway. All eyes turned to see a broad-shouldered man in a well-tailored suit standing there, badge glinting on his chest. "Not without proper documentation, which I suspect you don't have, Lieutenant." "Marshal Davis," Warren acknowledged stiffly, "this doesn't concern you." "Federal marshal on federal business," Davis corrected, stepping into the room. "Seems it concerns me directly." He turned to Varina. "Miss Mantooth. I've been looking for you. Your father's lawyer in Denver asked me to locate you, something about land claims that need immediate attention." Varina's surprise was evident, but she recovered quickly. "Yes, Marshal. I have been delayed in my journey." The Marshal nodded, then fixed Warren with a hard stare. "Lieutenant, I suggest you and your man return to your unit. I'll be escorting Miss Mantooth to Helena, where legal matters can be properly addressed." Warren's face flushed with anger. "This woman is wanted for nothing that stands up to legal scrutiny," Davis interrupted. Unless you'd like me to examine your orders more closely, perhaps communicate directly with your commanding officer about harassment of civilians. The threat hung in the air, clear and effective. Warren's jaw clenched, but he finally nodded curtly. "This isn't over," he said, looking at Ransom. "Remember that." After the soldiers departed, Marshal Davis explained his presence. "Joseph Calloway contacted me when he heard rumors of the army pursuing a man-tooth heir. Your father's claim is well documented and legally sound. The army knows it, which is why they're trying intimidation rather than legal channels." "How did you know to find her here?" Ransom asked. Davis smiled slightly. Wasn't looking for her specifically, was investigating reports of army overreach in the territory. Happened to overhear the lieutenant planning to return to your ranch. Figured it was worth checking out. The marshal's arrival changed everything. With his official escort, Varina could safely travel to Helena to begin the legal process of defending her claim. The threat wasn't eliminated. Warren and others like him would continue to oppose her, but now she had the law explicitly on her side. As they prepared for the journey to Helena the next morning, Ransom found Varina on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the valley in golden light. "Everything's packed," he said, joining her at the railing. "Marshal thinks we can reach Helena by nightfall if we start soon." Varina nodded, her expression thoughtful. "This changes matters. With legal representation and the marshal's support, I may not need to hide anymore." "That's good, isn't it?" Ransom asked, sensing hesitation in her voice. "It means I have choices now," she said carefully. "Including where to make my home once the land claim is settled." Ransom felt uncertainty rise within him. Their conversation in the root cellar had suggested a shared future, but circumstances had changed rapidly. Perhaps in the clear light of day, with new options before her, Varina would reconsider. "Whatever you decide," he said, striving for a neutrality he didn't feel, "I'm glad I could help get you this far." Varina turned to face him fully, her dark eyes searching his. "Last night in the root cellar you spoke of partnership, of building something new together. Did you mean those words, Ransom Miller, or were they simply born of the moment?" The directness of her question demanded equal honesty. "I meant every word," Ransom said, "but I understand if your path leads elsewhere now." "Do you?" Varina stepped closer. "Because I am not certain you do. You speak of caring for me, of wanting me to stay, yet you pull away at the first sign that I might actually have the freedom to choose." Her insight struck home, revealing the fear that still lingered beneath his growing feelings, the fear of loss that had kept him isolated for so long. "You're right," he admitted, "old habits, keeping distance to avoid pain." "And has that strategy brought you happiness these past years?" Varina asked gently. "No," Ransom acknowledged, "just survival." "I told you once that hope is a luxury I rarely allow myself," Varina said, her voice softening. "Perhaps it is time we both learned to embrace it more fully." She reached for his hand, her touch warming him more than the rising sun. "I still have much to determine about my future, Ransom Miller. But I know with certainty that I wish you to be part of it, if you are brave enough to take that risk with me." The last of Ransom's reservations dissolved at her words. He drew her closer, one hand gently tracing the curve of her cheek. "I think I finally understand what my father meant about the heart knowing its home," he said softly, "even when the mind makes objections." Their first kiss was gentle, a promise rather than a demand. When they parted, Varina's smile held a warmth he'd glimpsed only rarely before, unguarded, full of possibility. "We should go," she said, though she made no move to step away. "The marshal is waiting." "He can wait a moment longer," Ransom murmured, drawing her back to him. The journey to Helena marked the beginning rather than an ending. With Marshal Davis's assistance, Varina secured Calloway's legal representation, beginning the process of defending her land claim against the army's attempts to seize it. The fight would be long and challenging, but with proper documentation and growing public support for her cause, victory seemed increasingly possible. Ransom remained by her side throughout, his own perspective on the future expanding beyond the boundaries he'd set after his family's deaths. Together, they began planning not just for the defense of Varina's land, but for the growth of the Box M Ranch, apple orchards along the creek as James had dreamed, improved breeding stock as his father had envisioned, and new ideas Varina brought from her own experiences. 6 months after that snowy day when Ransom found an injured woman in the wilderness, they stood together on the porch of the ranch house, watching spring transform the valley. Varina wore a simple white dress, Ransom a clean suit rarely taken from its trunk. Ezra beamed beside them as the circuit preacher pronounced them husband and wife, joining their lives officially as their hearts had joined that night in a root cellar, over poetry and shared dreams. Two worlds becoming one, Varina whispered as they stood alone later, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple. And building something new together, Ransom added, his arm around her waist. The frontier remained harsh and unforgiving, the challenges of their unusual union still present in the prejudices of some neighbors and the continuing legal battle for Varina's inheritance. But they faced these challenges together, drawing strength from the love that had grown from an act of simple human kindness on a snow-covered hillside. In finding each other, they had both discovered what they truly needed, not just survival, but a life fully lived with all its risks and rewards. The isolation that had seemed like protection revealed itself as a prison, while the connection they'd forged offered the truest freedom either had known. As twilight settled over the Bitterroot Valley, Ransom Miller looked at the woman beside him and knew with absolute certainty that some risks were worth taking, and that the heart, when finally allowed to speak, rarely led astray.